power of Zoom and technology. Oh, we're not even on Zoom, right? But man, this is something else. Okay.
Having been kicked off there, I'm back. Yes.
And you're back, Madam Clerk. We're going to go back to our other matter. Was that 2020-5 in terms of the mayors and restaurants and CARES grants and things like that. Thoughts about the mayor, his restaurants? Can they apply for these CARES grants? What do you think? Not all at once. I can't.
Isha, what do you think?
I don't have a problem with it. I don't think it. It seems like the funds were distributed among the different areas and different entities, or not different entities, the different general areas. That was all subject to assembly approval. That was the amount of money that was that was approved for those restaurants. Doesn't seem like these restaurants are any different than any other restaurants. I'm trying to I think given the answers to the questions that everybody asked, all of my potential concerns were alleviated. So I guess I can say that, and then if any more detail we can talk about. But I'm generally inclined to think it's not a problem.
Okay, Jack?
I agree with what Aisha said there. It seemed like, we're in the realm now where he has essentially the same interest as anyone else that's in that industry, and he doesn't have any control over the criteria of, what's being awarded. So, because, like we do all these waivers, right, for people where, someone is a music teacher at ASD and their husband has a roofing business, and, the roofer can apply to work on a school because, the teacher has no say on whether or not the roofing contract goes to him. And I think it's kind of the same thing here, even though he's the mayor and theoretically has a lot of influence because it's Char making the decision and because everyone's on an equal playing field that's applying. It just doesn't seem to me like he has any control over it. And so therefore it doesn't make it an ethical issue.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't, and I agree. I mean, after all the questions, the answers to our questions, all of my concerns with the rest. Yeah, it doesn't sound like he has any discretionary decision making. It's handed off to Char. And then, Aisha, I thought your line of questioning was absolutely right. One worry would be, hey, how did these eligibility requirements get paid, and how did the money decisions get made? The initial, how much of the funds go to it? But it sounds like everything was either through the assembly or like things like the eligibility decisions. The eligibility requirements sound like they're very standardized, and that there's nothing particularly quirky about the mayor's restaurant that somehow gets pulled in or something.
I suppose if we wanted to be super cautious, we could look at those eligibility criteria. But I think it's also perfectly appropriate to sort of take take Jason at his word that there's nothing in those eligibility criteria that was crafted specifically to say only restaurants with the name Roadhouse in the title get this money or something. So I'm comfortable going forward without doing that. So
and I think we're okay. We always have in these opinions that boilerplate kind of language, and we can include that this was based in part on the interview with Jason, and provided that the information given was accurate, and the opinion has force, so we can include that there. So.
May I ask a question, Terry?
Sure.
Yeah. And I think there was information that was included in the packet with kind of the factual background for that mayor opinion. And I think it was about that section 14 or something like that of the act that seemed to, there was like an email exchange, I think, between, and I thought maybe Dee could shed light on that. I think that's a separate issue. There may be sort of an ethical or conflict of interest provision in the act itself that's separate and distinct from our conflict of interest provision under the ethics code. And we are the masters of our ethics code, but not, that 14 title, like to 14 or chapter section 14 thing. But Dee, can you illuminate?
I just thought that was interesting background because other municipalities have wrestled with the same issue. And so when somebody, where there's there's a statewide municipal attorney thing, and they wrote to the state, and the state, Amy Dombowski actually answered that and said, hey, we don't think it's a problem under the Article 14 conflict of interest for, I don't have it right in front of me, but if it's set criteria, we don't think it's a problem. And that's because, half your elected officials and mayors and stuff own businesses. But they did not think it was a problem if it was open to the public. I forget, I don't have that wording right in front of me. But then it's the yellow highlight stuff of the stuff I sent you that's on the request for opinion. Let me just get it, be easier if I get it. Let's see, so now stuff. Okay, here, materials. So let me find the mayor's one. Oh, no, wrong one. Okay, so.
People might be able to see it now. I tried sharing it. Can you folks see it?
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting what the actual grant people also thought, that the state, and that they say, this second highlight, this provision does not preclude officers, employees, blah, 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 from participating in programs implemented by the local government, generally available to the public and subject to fixed eligibility standards. So this wasn't a conflict of interest under Article 14, but then if you notice the next one, it says, this guidance is specific to Article 14 of the grant, and local governments may have adopted their own standards that would require disclosure. So I just thought it was interesting that the grant itself, or the grant administrator, the state, or the CARES Act funding had already sort of dealt with this issue, and they didn't find it problematic. Whether that's sort of persuasive to you or just additional information, because I right away said, well, wait a minute, is it a problem with the grant itself? And it's not. So other than that, it's a little bit persuasive, but it's not directly on point.
Actually, Dee, I was sort of confused by the information between, the section that says this provision does not preclude officers, employees, et cetera, that yellow provision. That example above it was what confused me and sort of seemed to say that perhaps the author of this section, I think that was Amy, right? Mm-hmm. That she seemed to be suggesting that if the local government was going to use the grant funds to construct the temporary medical facilities, and the mayor owned a construction company, and I equate that to having an ownership in a construction company, the grant funds could not be used to compensate the construction company for the construction. So I read that as saying, wait, are they saying, what are they really saying here? Okay. Are they saying that's not legit?
Yeah, like for instance, we have the job program where they're going around and fixing up trails, that if the mayor owned the company that was getting paid to go fix up that trails, that is not okay. Because he was actually getting paid for the work, direct.
As opposed to here, he would be getting, say, for example, one of his restaurants, met the eligibility criteria.
But it's awarding a contract instead of grant funds. Right. So I think the idea is presumably there was some sort of like bid among competitive entities, and then the contract was awarded to a specific. That's the difference, right? I mean, in this case, it's not a competitive bid process, and then the money is awarded to one entity. It's a general grant going to all the entities based on the same criteria.
Correct. Yeah, I hear you.
Is that the difference? I think.
Yeah. Totally. In fact, you guys brought that up in your discussion when someone asked us, either Aisha or Lisa asked, in fact, is there any competition among the restaurants for this money? Mm-hmm. No, there isn't. It's available to everybody.
Thanks, Dee, for the explanation about this section. I wasn't sure if there was, what we were to make of it, but I appreciate that. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, good. So I take it we're in agreement then that that the mayor's restaurants there's nothing in the code that section of the code does not prohibit the mayor's restaurants from being eligible for those grants, because the mayor does not take any official action in terms of the administration or decision portion of the grant. Is that right? Okay, very good. Well, I'll take that as a vote. I think as agreed to that. So we've got who wants to write what? So does anyone want to write this one up?
I can do it if you guys are. I can do it.
That would be very great, Lisa. Thank you.
That would be awesome.
Can I ask you what you finally lit on? So did you discuss, and it doesn't matter to me, but did you discuss the business about interest in municipal contract versus conflict of interest?
I think we got at a little bit of both. We were mostly, initially concerned about what official actions the mayor might be taking in giving out these grants, and Jason suggested that it's all pretty much devolved to Char, and then Char is the one that's actually making the decision. And then in conflict of interest, Aisha was really pushing on sort of like where did the decision about how much money was going to go to this particular program, eligibility requirements, and it sounded like either decisions had been run through the assembly, and the decisions that hadn't been run through the assembly, like the eligibility requirements, that they were pretty standard eligibility requirements that were mapping pretty closely to the Treasury Department's guidance on this. And so it didn't seem like that would be where there might have been a conflict, right? It wouldn't be a question of Penny of having a municipal contract, but it would be a conflict in making the decisions about the grant program. And it looked like, at least based on our questions, that there wasn't any smoke there. Aisha, was that your sense of how that went?
Yeah, I think that's right. It wasn't that anything either in the amount of money to go to all the entities combined or the specific entity or the eligibility criteria for who gets the money was sort of designed to benefit the entities that the mayor has an interest in any more than anybody else. So it wasn't no one got his interest didn't get a leg up in the development of the amount of money or where it was going, I guess.
But my concern
maybe one way to address the 060 and 100D is that it doesn't seem to me like I think we decided that it just wasn't an official action.
Okay.
So under 060C, where it defines it, he's not really participating in anything that's in there, and therefore it doesn't really meet the prohibitions in 060 for conflict of interest or in 100 for municipal contracts, because he's not really making the decision. And so it kind of addresses both that way.
I guess my concern there is that the 101 is really black and white. A public servant cannot receive a grant, period. Criteria, you can't do it. And except if it does not take the official action, as you're talking about, Jack, or it's reviewed by the board. I don't know. I mean, official action was meant to be like almost clerical or ministerial. Really, he's the head of the administration. He has influence with the other members of the 8th floor who are dealing with it. He's their direct boss. I mean, I love your decision, but I'm concerned to characterize his role as not official action. In the broader sense, as the people who helped write the code knows, official action is really meant to be incredibly narrow, like really not doing much at all. Boy, I don't know about this. The mayor, the head guy, the person who talks to everybody on the 8th floor all the time. So he may not be directly involved. I get that. He's not perhaps directly involved, but he's sitting on the dais when the assembly is discussing this. So I'm a little bit concerned about phrasing it as not direct action. I prefer you went B that, but we looked at it and we just don't think it's a problem because for all the other reasons.
Hold on, Dee. Let me make sure that I understand what you're.
Okay. Well, and this was a Julia thing at one point where she made it aware on some other one we had was, this is a black and white prohibition. 1.15.100 B2.
Wait, B2.
Right? Okay. So that's not in that there, Terry. You almost have to get to the code. That's the exceptions to the flat rule. Because the flat rule is a public servant may not acquire, receive, or be a party in a municipal grant. Period.
But Dee, the definition of official action says does not include action on a matter that does not substantially evaluate or impact the merits of the recommendation or decision. And that's what we're saying under B2, which is where we're at. You know, he's not evaluating or impacting the merits of the decision on who gets this funding. You know, it's open to everybody. It's Char that's making that
It's
decision.
not the administration, but in the overall, when it goes to the assembly, the administration has input. They did not oppose this amendment. He could have directed that they oppose it.
But the assembly still might have approved it, right?
Oh, sure. Oh, no. I'm not saying I mean, I think that the rest of the analysis is totally valid. I mean, he didn't participate, he doesn't administer, but to say that the head of a government is not taking official action because he's silent, I mean, I don't know. I just, I wouldn't fall my sword on official action. I'd rather do B, that for all the reasons set forth above, not so much it wasn't official action, but just there just appears to be no conflict. It was handled by on every step of the line. It was really handled by other people. I'm being a purist. I'm being a Terry. I cannot believe
But you
Terry.
know,
I know, right? Can't believe it.
But I think that's saying the same thing. Like,
that's how I feel too. I feel like, in a sense, you know, if you fall on B, what criteria do you actually use to determine that under B, it's not a conflict? Well, the way you look at whether something's a conflict is, you know, you kind of look in part at, you look at the nature of what the individual's actual role in the matter was. And I think based on what Jason told us, and we kind of looked at it a couple different levels, we looked first at how was the determination made? And maybe I'm mischaracterizing this, but you had $150 million in CARES Act money, and how was that divided up and a certain amount was decided to go to the restaurant business? It sounds like the restaurateurs wanted 21 million or something, and ultimately through some type of proposal by John Weddleton, they landed on a $7 million figure. And then at that point in time, criteria were established. And it sounds like that was the one piece, I think Aisha kind of characterized it well. There was interaction, it sounds like, between Chris Schutte and Jason in consultation with Char. And they came up with some eligibility criteria that were very, very generic and would not in any way impact, you know, or beneficially advantage the mayor's restaurants as opposed to any other restaurants.
Right. So
it seemed like the role of it seemed like the mayor's role in this was in fact not something that it wasn't a big decision-making role. He wasn't the driver. I think that's where we landed. So I guess I'm unclear, if you don't land on official action, what do you use as the basis for the criterion?
See, I think a regular conflict of interest analysis, you know, where this one we used once before, where the hot dog vendor in purchasing, where his wife got awarded a hot dog stand thing. And the first two times, I think, Terry, you remember this, we said, no, there is a conflict. And then we said, oh yeah, but okay, we're going to make this catch-all and say, even though technically you fall within official action, under just a generic, you know, an overall analysis where this just is too much of a black and white rule, which was again part of the old code, and Julia loved black and white rules, then you can come to us. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I just think that.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we are clear on where we're headed with it, because I don't want to write something just, you know, we've you know, where we've all determined not a problem, but we don't have concrete agreement on how we get to that conclusion. Maybe we need a little bit of discussion more about this, because I'm a little unclear. I don't know how you can get to the conclusion that he doesn't have a financial or private interest. I think he does, right? Because he's has an ownership interest in 3 restaurants. Do you then say it's not substantial? Well, I don't know if I can conclude that.
Well, I think you could, but see, I think you could. It's at best, say it's 15,000, and even if it was going directly to his pocket, which it can't, of course, it can't be. 10% of that is $1,500, and the 2 and the 4% are even less. But it isn't substantial, and it's going to be watered down as it's directed where to go, and so it's not like he gets a dividend back out.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I just don't think that's what we decided.
Well,
maybe we decided wrong.
I'm being Terry. I cannot believe I'm doing this.
Well, I mean, maybe there's two prongs to this, and maybe one of them is clearly is there a financial interest? I mean, how did Jason say these monies have to be used? You can use them to pay your employees. You can use them to pay your mortgage. You
Sure,
can't.
but then that means the restaurant makes more money if they can use this money to pay their payroll employees. I mean, I think there's
Correct.
Yeah, he has a financial interest as a director, officer, blah, 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 blah of that corporation. He definitely has a financial interest.
Correct. So the question is the next question becomes, if you fall under the general 1.15060 analysis, you look at whether or not that financial interest was substantial.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I've heard that it's pretty dire for restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
If they stay open, that seems substantial.
And see, also the definition of official action, for purpose of official action means participation in a, quote, process, including deliberation, in which a decision or recommendation is reached. He was part of that. He's at the assembly. I don't know if he went to the meetings. I assume he had lots of discussions with different people on the other parts of the proposal.
But see, what official action do you think he's taking? If 100B2, the public servant does not take official action that could directly affect the request, the award, the execution, or the administration of the grant, contract, or lease.
Okay, so which one are you reading? So 060 C2 or the other one?
No, I'm back at the 100. It's 115 B2. It's that black and white provision, but it doesn't say it's just any official action. The language is quite narrow. It seems to me, directly affect the request for services, nor the award, execution, or administration of the grant, contract, or lease. I think the feeling that we had was the way they set it up by sort of devolving the administration of the contract to CHAR, that the mayor's office has basically now been taken out of the loop, and restaurants will be requesting a grant, and the grants are going to be awarded and administrated by CHAR, not the mayor's office. And it didn't look like there was any particular, nefarious connection between CHAR and the mayor's office. It just looks at this point as an independent, agency that's been contracted out to manage the grant.
Yeah, no, I agree that the administration and the mayor have nothing to do with the administration of the grant. Going back to the other one, 060 C2, they define official action as action on a matter that does not substantially evaluate or impact the merits. I don't know, but his administration is that. I don't.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, Dee, because it's really hard to kind of tease out the administration, which consists of like Chris and Jason, who are two of the people closest to him, and the mayor. But maybe Terry's onto something when we talk about 1.15100 B2A. Maybe you can say this is official action because he has been involved, but is it official action that could directly affect the request for services or the award, execution, or administration of the grant, contract, or lease?
Yeah, but he's divorced himself from all of that.
Right. And so maybe that's the solution, Dee.
That on the basis of B, we're saying when you really look at A, it's not,
When you say B, Dee, what do you mean when you see B? Like
B is a second chance. If A is not met, the public servant may request additional review by the Board of Ethics.
And when we say A is not met, that means he did take official action that could directly affect blah, 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 blah.
And that's a question.
I'm a little uncomfortable.
I think we're stopping at 2A. I don't think we need to get to B.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with B because I'm not sure what criteria we're supposed to apply that would override A. You know what I mean?
And that would be fine with me because you're not saying he didn't take official action.
Yeah.
You're saying it's not one that did any of these three things. And certainly the award is assembly and the administration is assembly. Not administration. The administration is CHAR.
The award's CHAR, isn't it?
Excuse me?
The award's CHAR.
Well, yeah, you're actually right. Yeah, even the award is CHAR. All of that stuff is CHAR. Okay, so maybe that. I just hesitate. I mean, again, official action was really meant to be narrow, and we were rogue. We said no, we're going to make it broader because we have to be practical. But if you look at any other ethics code, it's like you do anything. So I think you're right. I think maybe that could work.
And just, it's interesting when we talked about this, I think we probably as a group failed to kind of tease out, go through the specifics of the analysis. I think our questions were so generally aimed at, what was the role of the mayor in all of these sorts of things. But in my mind, I kept thinking we are looking at a 1.15, 100 situation, which is more specific than say sort of that general conflict of interest section. And I know we've kind of landed that way before in other analyses where we are dealing with kind of grants or contracts or whatever. We generally tend to go to 1.15, 100 rather than looking at the more general provision. We look at the more specific rather than the general. At least that's where my brain was going. Does that make sense with everybody? I just want to make sure that I'm capturing the thought process of this fine board if I'm going to write this thing.
I think that's right. And I guess just a procedural question. So technically the request, I think the reason that I went to the section to 100B2 of the code is that the requests interpretation of that section of the code. So when that's the case on a request, I assume that the board can go and look more broadly at other applicable sections of the code. But I agree that in this case we don't have to, and I was talking about, I'll speak for myself, 100B2 at least.
That's helpful to me. Yeah. I thought that's where we were all kind of going.
And Lisa, you might add, I mean, like, and where there was a sort of informal conflict of interest analysis was sort of the questioning that we had of Jason of how the eligibility requirements were developed, because they certainly were developed ultimately in consultation, but ultimately they were developed by the mayor's office, by him and Chris Schutte, it sounds like. But again, it sounds like those eligibility requirements, the way that they were developed in no way benefited the mayor. It sounds like the eligibility requirements are very standardized. There's nothing particular about the mayor's restaurants that required contortions of those eligibility requirements. And so, I mean, because that would be, if there's a conflict of interest, now that the authority's been devolved to CHAR, the conflict of interest isn't going to be in the awarding and the administrating of these grants. It would have been in the decision to give authority to CHAR or the development of the eligibility requirements that CHAR now must work with. And that's where there might have been a potential conflict.
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking, Terry, and why I asked some of the questions I did, was that if we had like a situation where 150 million was going to the Muni and 120 million of that was going to go to restaurants, that might have raised some questions for me about the mayor's role. How do we get to that number? But the number is pretty small. The number is 7 million, and Jason did say the restaurant folks wanted more. Presumably, if the mayor were truly driving this bus, we might have ended up with more. To me, it just felt like 7 million was an outrageous figure that demonstrated that restaurant interest prevailed over all other.
Well, and the 7 million I recall was approved by the assembly. I thought
right,
and that would be the big one. Right. That's the big one where you really could have had a bad conflict. That if a massive amount of money went to the restaurant, and it was approved only through the mayor's office.
Yeah, and I think that they said that there was give and take back and forth, and that actually Weddleton proposed it.
Yeah,
so
I was saying, guys, the assembly not only proposed it and enacted approved the amendment. So
okay.
Administration even set that forward, and I would guess, Terry, that the CHARs, that it sounded to me like they're the ones that really worked with the 8th floor and 8th floor is the mayor staff. Worked with the 8th floor to develop the eligibility. That the mayor's office didn't just hand that out.
Yeah. I think Jason was pretty good about that. Yeah. So I feel pretty good about this discussion right now, and thanks, G, for sharpening us and getting us to focus a little more precisely.
Rarely do I take the position.
What was that?
Lisa, I'm sorry, Lisa, if you're going to write that one up, then I would appreciate that. I hate to say, I've got to wrap things up here. I've got to go pick up Elias from school. Sorry, so Cheryl had to work late, and so I'm, as it turns out, not quite available till 4 o'clock after all. Lisa, if you could write up a draft of that one, I would appreciate it. Dee, how timely is this? Do we need something official to the mayor like this week, or what are we looking at?
Well, can we just do an oral opinion that orally that we think it's fine and we'll have an opinion to follow?
Yes, I think, do we have a motion to support
Well,
that?
you're in executive,
Oral.
you need to come out of it.
No, I think we should be out of executive session. Aren't we? Yeah, we're back in public session, yeah.
I will make a motion to make an oral with written decision to follow.
Second.
Second? All those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye. No?
Aye.
Okay, very good. So motion passes. So yes, we have oral commitment, oral advice to the mayor that his restaurants can participate in that grant program, and we will have an oral opinion to follow. We gave some oral advice to our other person, which is still confidential. And so I guess I'll write something up for that. And Dee, maybe you and I can talk later about that.
For the other one or for this one?
For the other one.
So this one, I think it could be as simple as a one-liner from Jennifer to either me or not to me, make it to Jason and just said an oral, or well, maybe not. I'll tell you what, why don't I put together a 3-liner that we can convey on to somebody? For this current one, I think I'm asking too much of Jennifer to figure out what to say and not say.
All
For
right.
now, it'll simply be yes, but.
All right, very good, everybody. Anything else?
Are we meeting next
Okay.
week?
Just want to confirm the meeting next Thursday, 9 to 11. That's your regular time.
Thursday, 9 to 11. Okay.
All
Very
right.
good.
Hey, can
All
I
right,
ask you
everybody,
guys
have
a
a great.
question? Terry, before you
Sure.
leave, I hate to do this, but did we reach a decision about what's happening with the other one?
I think we lost our quorum.
Oh, we did lose a quorum. So what do we do then?
Okay, I'm going to come off.
We lost.
Sorry, Dee.
Do I need to go away? All right, I guess I'll
You
go.
might go bye-bye.
No, because we can't talk. We can't really talk about this one in open session
Okay.
anyway. So, long story short, yes, a decision was reached and some advice was imparted. And I guess I'll talk to you. I'll talk to Dee on the phone, or not Dee. I guess I'll have to talk to you on the phone further about what we think would be the best process in terms of writing something up. You know, if we meet next Thursday, I hadn't realized that we're meeting it as so soon as next Thursday. So maybe just the best way to do it would be to come in next Thursday with a draft written opinion and get that voted on by the board.
Yeah, and Terry, you would be the primary person
Yeah,
on.
I'll whip that one. I'll whip that one up. Yeah, it was a pretty interesting one. So I'll whip
Whip that out. Yep.
that.
Just
Talk
wrap
to
that
Steve
up.
about doing it quickly.
Steve, send him my way too after he's done with you.
All right, no need to adjourn. I'm going to stop the recording because you have lost quorum, so you're not really meeting right now.
We are not meeting. It doesn't.
We're
Bye,
not
Jen.
really
Thank
here
you.
right now.
Goodbye, all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Talk to you next week, guys.